The sea depths slowly pulled the girl down, enveloping her completely, giving her no chance of salvation. With a slight smile, the young man walked towards the elegant lady. He was eager to see her. Slowly wrapping his arms around Mary, Jake pulled her close and asked ironically if she could become a vile toy. One day, a young lady met a demon for the first time, but still managed to escape from him. Suddenly, Miss Young remembered how she had been roughly pushed into the seat. But Mary's torment did not end there. It continued to torment her and destroy her from within. The teacher's reputation is destroyed, as is the happiness she spent years creating. The girl had a loving husband, Thomas, who was ready to help at any moment. But soon, Jake's shadow began to deprive everyone of their opportunities, and then to threaten them. He challenged Miss Young to play a longer game than usual. Mary had to agree to his proposal, because she couldn't just sit there while her loved ones were suffering. Now she will have to pretend to be in a happy relationship with this demon and wait for the moment to escape. The girl understood that Jake would return very soon. He appeared, pinning the defenseless woman against the wall, and asked her what she had in mind. Yang realized that Mr. Shadow is not as invulnerable as he seems. He has weaknesses, and as long as there is even a drop of light left in her heart, she will fight and never give up. Someone's measured laughter was heard in the car, which sent goosebumps all over my body. With fingers frozen in fear, the girl dialed Emma's number. Mary desperately shouted shocking news into the phone receiver. She said she had killed a man. On a starry night, a car was driving along the highway, picking up enormous speed. Lady Young, who was driving, told her friend that she had found a shortcut and would be arriving soon. She chatted lightheartedly with Green and joked about her upcoming engagement. And with a smile, she suggested capturing this important moment on camera. But soon, the girl admitted that she really missed her old friends. After ending the call, she pressed harder on the gas pedal. Nothing distracted her attention from the road. But suddenly, as she continued driving, Mary noticed something strange on the edge of the road. An unfamiliar guy stood over the body and actively waved his arms. Yang stopped the car abruptly, causing smoke to billow out from under the tires. Quickly opening the door, the girl rushed to help the unknown people. The young lady heard a sound behind her, but it was too late. When she woke up, her head was splitting with pain. One of the guys approached the other with a question about how exactly they would deal with the victim. The gray-haired man calmly replied, going about his business, that burying it would be enough. The men obeyed the leader unconditionally and began to press on the defenseless girl. Mary tried very hard to remain calm, but it was very difficult. Miss begged not to kill her, desperately trying to save her life. She even offered her car, money, and everything she had to the attackers. The criminal tried to dispel all the hopes of the unfortunate woman, saying that she could no longer be saved. But the girl did not calm down. She was even ready to forget about their meeting if she was saved. She turned her gaze to the guy sitting on the bags. However, he did not even think of breaking away from his work and only asked his comrades to be more careful. One of the men roughly grabbed the girl by the hair and dragged her. She was pushed against a tree and pressed by the throat so that it was impossible to get out. The bandit said with a grin that he would kill Mary without pain if she behaved quietly. He had already begun to strangle his victim. But the strap of her dress fell from the woman's shoulder and distracted the attacker's attention. Without looking away, the unknown person approached the leader with a proposal to change the method of execution. Miller, after thinking for a moment, noted that now was not the time to fulfill his brother's lustful desires. Yang realized that this was a chance to survive, and offered herself on the condition that she would not be killed. The restrainer assured Andrew that he would only lose a little and would not delay them. The third criminal was indignant, but no one drew his attention to this. The gray-haired man nevertheless allowed the man to carry out his plan. He didn't hesitate and, laughing a little, dragged the defenseless girl to the side. Mary noted that the car would be more comfortable, which was hard to disagree with. The bandit changed direction and then roughly pushed the frail body into the seat. Continuing to mock and press the woman, he began to kiss her neck. And then, taking off his t-shirt, he promised that if the girl was obedient, then everything would be fine. The unfortunate woman tried to remain calm and did not resist, submitting completely. The girl noticed the key. Maybe something could be done with it. The man above her suddenly ordered her to be more active. Yang, looking at every detail, diligently tried to find something. Finally, her gaze fell on the wooden handle that she had been looking for with such hope. It was the knife that my beloved husband had recently used to cut fruit. He carefully wiped it with a cloth to remove any dirt. Thomas put the sharp object in his pocket, not suspecting how soon his wife might need it. Mary decided to take a risky step. because her strength was leaving her with every second. She tried to get the knife, still thinking about her family and friends. Suddenly, the girl felt it with her fingers and grabbed it tightly. Pulling the cold weapon towards herself, she swung. The criminal went cold, sensing something was wrong. Without wasting any time, Yang plunged the blade into the man's back with all her might. One of the bandits noticed that the couple in the car suddenly became quiet. Suddenly, the car's headlights blinded everyone around. Miller turned and looked in the direction where the light was coming from. The car's wheels whistled from the sudden movement. The car was rushing towards Andrew, who did not have time to analyze the situation. Mary, confident in her actions, gripped the steering wheel tightly. The third criminal managed to react and push the leader away, but he himself got hit by the wheels and was thrown to the side of the road by the impact. The girl, not realizing what was happening, pressed the gas pedal harder. The numbers on the speedometer grew with every second until they went off the charts. The car was rushing along the road at a tremendous speed, the speed of which continued to increase. Finally, she reached the city, where it was at least a little safer, and began to brake. Coming to a complete stop, Miss Yang let out a loud sigh of relief. A sudden shudder ran through her from head to toe. Mary screamed deafeningly throughout the entire salon, not worrying about the fact that she could easily lose her voice. With shaking hands, she reached for the phone, which had been lying on the seat all this time. Having dialed someone's number, I pressed the green call button. Turning first to the police and then to her husband, the girl began to tell a shocking story. A huge moon, glittering red, illuminated the roadway. The car stopped right on the edge of the cliff. Miss Young tried to see the road in the distance, but she couldn't do it. Someone's hand slammed on the front seat window, startling the brunette. It was Miller. He looked at her with hatred. The man swung his right hand sharply, trying to apply as much force as possible. Andrew punched the glass with his fist, sending shards flying all over the car. He grabbed Mary by the chin, who was ready to lose consciousness from fear. The madman pulled back the hand holding the axe to strike. The blade of the weapon quickly flashed right in front of the defenseless woman. Cold sweat was pouring down the girl's face, and it had long since soaked her clothes through and through. Someone's hand suddenly pulled back the curtain, revealing a view of the window. A bright light fell on Yang's face, causing her to come to her senses. She opened her eyes suddenly and began to laugh nervously. Thomas looked at his beloved with worry, not knowing how to help. Mary explained that she had had another nightmare. The man assured that it was just a dream, that Miller died 3 years ago, and then he happily informed his wife that breakfast was ready and it was time to get up. He got out of bed and went to the kitchen. The girl looked after the person dearest to her. Yang sat on the bed for a while longer, thinking about the events that had been haunting her dreams for 48 months. She went to the bathroom and began to wash herself, trying to somehow cheer herself up. And then she raised her eyes and stared into the mirror. Mary looked very closely at her reflection and wondered why she was reliving this hell over and over again at night. The lady wrapped her fingers around the wedding ring and carefully adjusted it. While she was brushing her teeth, her beloved opened the door and asked what drink she should choose. The girl, without thinking, pointed to the coffee, and she noted to herself that she was very glad that Thomas was in her life, because he really helps her cope with difficulties. While Yang tied her husband's tie, the young couple joked and laughed. The guy pretended to be a knight and played along with his beloved. 3 years have already passed since Mary moved, and after her wedding, her parents also decided to move to this town and now live nearby. The girl has already completely forgotten some memories. After completing her master's degree, she became a university consultant, and so far everything has been going remarkably smoothly. The student asked permission to enter the office and received a positive answer. Suddenly, the boy informed the teacher that Emma had not shown up for the class meeting and had not visited the dorm since last semester. Yang reassured John that she would look into the matter, but suddenly the phone rang. An unknown person informed Mary that her car was parked in a bus parking lot and that it needed to be moved urgently. Miss apologized and promised to follow all instructions. The girl got into the car and drove off. The car moved slowly towards the underground floor. The teacher noticed that the new parking lot was very dark. She adjusted the rearview mirror with her hand and then turned around. My heart started beating panicky and wildly, for no apparent reason. Someone watched what was happening from his car. Miss Young stepped out of the car and suddenly died. She was perplexed because she was the only one in the whole room. Suddenly, the stranger began to walk towards the young lady. He turned to her and asked how to get to the building of the Faculty of Foreign Languages. Mary's eyes widened in surprise and fear as a guy stood behind her. He was dressed in a smart suit and tie, and had sunglasses on his face. His voice sounded very familiar. The lady carefully turned towards the source of the sound, in agonizing anticipation of seeing her interlocutor. And the man she saw terribly frightened the unfortunate woman. The teacher stood in a stupor. She was overcome with fear. Yang quickly began to run away from the man, shouting something about him not coming closer. But suddenly she tripped and fell with a crash. The stranger asked if everything was okay, and seemed confused. The girl looked at him in amazement, and did not take her eyes off him. The guy was terribly similar to the one who still haunts her nightmares. Mary screamed deafeningly, shouting out some incomprehensible things. But the man came even closer and extended his hand to help him stand up. The teacher crawled along the asphalt with incredible pity, like a wounded dog. Soon she stood up and ran quickly again without looking back. A lonely car key lay on the road. The unknown hand carefully picked it up and squeezed it in its palm. He turned to the driver and asked him to wait for him in the car. Laughing nervously, Young raced down the sidewalk, knocking down passers-by. Quickly dialing her husband's number, she began to insist that Miller had found her. At this time, a man from the parking lot was climbing the university stairs. Thomas convinced his wife that she had confused the criminal with someone else, since they themselves had ensured that the sentence was carried out. The gray-haired man continued walking and gradually made his way through the crowd. The teacher's boyfriend asked her not to leave people, so that there would always be someone nearby, and promised to pick her up. Mary hung up and let out a nervous breath. She quickly walked up the steps, deftly avoiding the students. Yang was walking down the hallway when she suddenly stopped and noticed the girls standing outside the classroom. The woman tried to find out the reason for their presence there. She squeezed into the room and saw him. The young man greeted the girl politely. Without hesitation, the stranger announced that he was Emma's cousin, and that he had come to fill out the paperwork for her expulsion. He apologized because he realized that he had somehow offended the teacher. The female students watched their conversation and admired the elegant man. He took the keys out of his pocket and held them out, asking if Mary was their owner. She thanked him and asked him to put the thing on the table, while she was about to call her student. But her brother, having predicted the actions, offered his phone number. Yang, overcoming her fear, accepted the item. The woman clarified the identity of the person on the other end of the line and briefly described the situation. The student apologized and explained that the doctor would not let her leave the hospital. Having finished the conversation, the teacher looked at the boy and tried to drive away bad thoughts. She informed him that Emma still needed to fill out an application. She also specified that she needed a diagnosis of the disease and a letter of recommendation for rest. The man asked the woman for her number so that he could easily contact her later. But soon there was a refusal, since you can always call the office phone. The stranger was silent for a moment and then thanked her politely. And then he suddenly decided to introduce himself and presented his ID. Turning around, Mary noticed a business card in his hand. It had a photograph and a caption that said the card's owner was named Jake Shadow. Yang offered to walk the gentleman home, but the guy intercepted her mid-sentence. Emma's brother asked with a sly smile if he looked like anyone, or, to be more precise, on a person who caused a lot of pain. Jake stepped back and asked for his opinion on the matter. But without giving me a chance to answer, he turned around abruptly and said goodbye. The girl was riding in the car and looking out the window while her husband tried to calm her down and drove the car towards the police station. But Mary didn't even try to have a dialogue with him and only quietly cooed. The young couple was met by a police officer they knew, Michael Smith. He suggested going into the office, while Yang explained the reason for the unexpected visit. Breaking into a scream, the woman began to question him about the execution of the criminal. The law enforcement officer wanted to confirm the identity, but the teacher interrupted him, identifying the unknown person as the very same bandit. The man remembered arresting the guy. The girl apologized again and told a story about a man who was painfully similar to an old enemy. She clarified all the small details, even claiming that the look was almost exactly like the one the deceased had. The policeman asked me to calm down and sit down on the sofa. He assured that he personally interviewed Andrew, and then Smith sent him to prison to be executed, which he signed. But then Miller did something no one expected, and something that left a deep impression. This scoundrel, right before his execution, voluntarily donated his corneas. Mary looked at Michael in shock. She simply couldn't believe what she had just heard. Yang was confused, because that man really did look a lot like him. Thomas reminded his wife that she had seen the stranger's ID, and that she could let the police officer check it. It dawned on the woman that, indeed, it was possible to provide personal data. She picked up a pen and carefully began to write out the letters that soon became her residential address and date of birth. Miss asked to punch and look at this strange stranger. Smith read the notes and was surprised. He was impressed by the amount of information Yang had remembered. The man began entering data into his computer, checking every letter. But what Michael saw shocked him. He agreed with the lady that the man looked very much like a criminal. The police officer opened Andrew's photo and began comparing people. Smith looked at the images for a long time and carefully, but soon concluded that they were two different people. Michael walked the couple to the car and assured the girl that he would check the specific circumstances again. He also asked that if Jake tried to contact her, she call him. By the time we returned home, the sky had already acquired a dark hue. Thomas, wearing an apron, carefully laid the dinner out on the table. Suddenly, Mary announced that she wanted to go back to medical school. The man said that to become a doctor, one needs good training, and one can quit one's job for this purpose. Yang began to object, because without her there would be no money, to which the lady's lover offered his own, since it was important to him that she only do what interests her. The woman objected because she also wanted to earn big money, but she remembered that she would be studying science. Mary jumped on her husband while he was asking her whether she wanted a bigger salary or to study, but it turned out to be both. The guy threw the teacher on the bed and started threatening her. He began to actively tickle Mary while she laughed loudly. But suddenly he stopped and languidly promised that he would always love her. The girl blushed deeply at these words. The lips of the young people very slowly approached each other. They almost kissed, but were interrupted by the sound of a phone ringtone. The woman felt for the smartphone and grabbed it with her hand. She greeted her interlocutor, but her cheeks were still flushed. The stranger approached the teacher and reported that her student John had stolen things. She asked the teacher to come as soon as possible. Mary approached the building and was amazed at how huge it was. On the upper floors, passers-by looked like tiny ants. Yang asked where she should go and continued moving. The stranger approached her and pointed to the place where she needed to go. The teacher was riding in the elevator and discussing why John needed to look for a part-time job so far from the university. She politely apologized and said that she was going to pick up the student. The girl in the suit greeted her, expressing all her displeasure. And then she said that she found her phone with the courier, although the food still hadn't been delivered. The student struggled to escape the guard's grip and insisted that it was not true. Mary asked for forgiveness for John, but I noticed that there had been no problems with him before. The stranger attacked her and accused her of rudeness. She screamed and started asking for someone to call the police. Suddenly, the student intervened in the conversation and began to tell how it really was. But very soon he stopped short, embarrassed to continue. But he quickly gathered his courage and told how the woman tried to seduce him, and he refused. The unknown woman screamed even louder at the poor guy, claiming that he was talking nonsense. Someone came out of the next room at the sound of the scream. It turned out to be Shadow. Jake was surprised by the teacher's presence here. Suddenly, several people called out to him at once. The blonde turned to the president and accused John of stealing again. The man, as if not paying attention to her exclamations, asked the teacher if this was her student. Yang introduced him and said that Emma also knew the guy as a good and decent person. Shadow stated that he trusted Mary, which allowed him to take the student. The girl, bowing her head in respect, quickly thanked him. She grabbed John by the wrist and pulled him towards the exit. The guys quickly approached the elevator and called it. But before they could get inside, Jake caught up with them and invited the woman to dinner. Yang, clearly nervous, quickly agreed, but noted that they should have invited him as an apology. Shadow noticed this and explained that he just wanted to talk about his sister. The teacher actively tried to find a reason not to come, even bringing up her husband. And then she promised to invite him herself somewhere near the university. John noticed the fear emanating from the teacher. The president did not object, but only asked to always be on the phone. An awkward silence fell between the people in the salon. Finally, the girl started the engine and the car started moving. The student decided not to waste any more time and began to assure Miss Young again that he had not lied, but had told the pure truth. He explained that he was embarrassed by such a proposal and tried to leave as quickly as possible, and the blonde accused him of stealing. Mary said that she believed him, but it was too late to do anything. They would not be able to achieve the truth. She began to lecture him and tell him that some people have insidious intentions, so he needs to be more careful. John changed the subject and asked where the teacher would go with that man tomorrow. He bravely promised to come to the meeting place and guard her, but the girl noted that this was unnecessary, that he should better focus on his studies. A little shyly, the student admitted that she was the best girl he had ever met. The teacher thanked him for the compliment with a smile. She earnestly asked the guy not to fall in love with her secretly, since she was already married, John laughingly reproached the woman for being narcissistic and reassured her by saying that he didn't like older women. When Mary entered the apartment, she found her husband packing his things. Perplexed, she asked the reason for such actions. Thomas explained that his boss had called him and notified him of an upcoming business trip. Yang was clearly upset by this news. The couple went to bed, but the girl could not sleep. She decided that she would tell her husband the whole truth after he returned home. In the morning, the teacher decided to search for information about Jake's shadow on the internet. But, to her surprise, she found nothing important. There weren't even any photographs of the president, so the woman assumed he was just very mysterious. Mary walked down the university corridor, expecting Michael Smith to answer her phone. Short beeps indicated that contact had not been established, but the teacher paid no attention to this. She dialed Jake's number and invited him to a restaurant that evening. Yang looked around at the customers and made sure that there were a lot of students in the establishment, which meant she was safe. The girl approached a separate room and greeted the man waiting for her. Shadow announced that he had already placed an order and invited them to sit down. The teacher immediately moved her chair away from the table and settled comfortably on it. There was silence in the room. No one dared to start a conversation. But suddenly the president began to speak. He turned briefly to Mary, who was waiting for him to continue his sentence. The man looked at her without revealing himself, but nevertheless returned to the dialogue. Jake asked her to tell him why she was so afraid of him. He couldn't help but notice the woman's peculiar behavior when he was nearby. Yang told a story about how she met a band of robbers several years ago, and that Shadow looked very much like one of them. The president understood the situation and apologized, because he had scared her. The teacher hoped that Jake wouldn't take it to heart. But suddenly, the gentleman changed the subject of the conversation and noticed that the girl was now very happy. But she was not going to give up her position, and drew attention to the fact that the president did not seem offended by life. He philosophically replied that his business, compared to his work as a teacher, was a hassle. He stood up and turned his back, then turned to the woman again. Shadow asked Mary if she thought the city was like a cunning beast, and that the lights of all different colors were confusing when her guard was down. To which Yang only replied evasively that now this place is always bright. She also noted that most people here are inclined towards kindness. After all, there is no point in living in darkness if there are no obvious reasons for it. Jake expressed his admiration and described her as a very interesting conversationalist. The woman simply thanked him for the compliment and asked him to return to the essence of today's meeting. The man quickly apologized and began rummaging through his bag. From there, he took out a small box, which was very beautifully wrapped with ribbon, and approached the perplexed woman with it. Shadow explained that it was a small gift as a thank you. Mary tried to refuse, because she felt very awkward from such attention. But the president assured her that there was nothing expensive there. Yang thanked him nervously and began unpacking. The girl took hold of the lid and pushed it back. Suddenly, horror appeared in the teacher's eyes. She saw a bloody photograph of the bandit she had stabbed to death. The teacher screamed loudly and threw the thing as far away from her as possible. A plate fell from the table and broke with a crash. This frightened the poor woman very much. She couldn't even stand on her feet. A measured laughter echoed throughout the room, the owner of which was Shadow. Mary felt herself feeling very dizzy. Leaning on the table, the woman stubbornly tried to get up. Still laughing and grinning, Jake asked if she liked his gift. Yang was still able to move her upper body onto the cloth-covered surface and called for help. She extended her hand towards the president, who was standing on it. The guy watched and enjoyed the spectacle without looking away. When the teacher woke up, she saw a happy Jake. He noticed the girl's awakening and was surprised because he assumed that she had another half-hour to sleep. Mary sat on the bed, trying to come to her senses and understand what was going on. She couldn't ask again properly, so she just mumbled something in response. Shadow continued to sit on the sofa. It seemed he understood the meaning of the sounds and explained that the teacher was in good health. Yang didn't take her eyes off him. After a short silence, she finally asked if the president was a demon. He only, mentioning all her courage and intelligence, reproached her for the stupidity and obviousness of the question. Exhausted, she wrapped her arms around her knees and hugged herself, crying. But she still asked the bandit if he was going to kill her. The man, not hiding his contempt, laughed loudly. After a while, he finally stopped and fell silent. And then, as if mimicking, repeated the question. Jake said that 4 years ago, he really was going to deal with the teacher. She had the opportunity, but she did not take advantage of it. Shadow looked at her pitifully, and for a second it seemed as if he sympathized with the unfortunate woman. But almost immediately a smile appeared, and then the man said that she no longer had a chance to choose death. The lady seemed very depressed and devastated, although she tried to hide it by covering her face with her hands. Mary asked Miller to calm down and think things over. They just needed to have a reasonable talk. But the president didn't even think about this option. He immediately understood that it would be about liberation, about forgetting everything and starting a new life again. The kidnapped woman lowered her head and remained silent, trying to think of something. Suddenly, some sparkling object caught her attention, giving her a small hope of salvation. On the nightstand near the bed lay a plate with sliced apples, and next to it a knife gleamed ominously. Yang immediately decided to use it if necessary. But suddenly the boy suggested something that the teacher certainly couldn't have expected: playing a game. The girl looked at the demon with confusion. She decided to find out what Jake was up to. Shadow explained that Mary has a happy family, a higher education, a job that is respected by other people, and a loving husband. Yang was still confused. She didn't know what they were asking of her. Or maybe she didn't want to and was afraid to find out. But the man made sure that the teacher realized what awaited her. He decided to turn a lady of noble birth into a dissolute, vile woman, finding it amusing. The unfortunate woman was deeply shocked. She could not even imagine the evil this demon was ready to do, that even death was not enough for him. With a deft movement of his hand, the criminal snapped his fingers so that the sound instantly spread throughout the entire room. Unfamiliar silhouettes began to appear in the doorway, and they clearly belonged to men. Mary reacted instantly and hit the edge of the plate. She jumped up and threw the knife, which was soon caught right in the air. Yang held the blade out in front of her, waving it wildly, pointing the blade at the strangers and shouting at them to stay back. Shadow quickly assessed the situation and turned towards the mercenaries. Without thinking, Jake ordered them to continue moving so that he could watch the woman kill people. The strangers obeyed and only quickened their steps, pressing as hard as they could on the defenseless woman. The teacher continued to scream and threaten the strangers in horror. The president watched the proceedings emotionlessly, his cold gaze burning into Mary. The trio was rapidly approaching, leaving no opportunity to hide or escape. The men jumped on the unfortunate woman and completely immobilized her. One of them roughly hit and pushed Yang towards the bed. They twisted the girl's arms behind her back and pressed her face into the mattress. The unknown man took some kind of pill out of his pocket, clearly having a clear plan of action. He shoved the capsule containing the substance into the teacher's mouth and made sure that the contents were swallowed. The victim suddenly weakened and fell to the floor while the criminals stood over her and grinned. Her eyes widened sharply. Strange wheezing sounds came from her chest, and the woman fell into despair. Sweat was pouring down like a river, and breathing was becoming more and more difficult. The tears continued to flow, and the teacher slowly began to lose consciousness and then fell asleep. The camera lens reflected an exhausted woman. One of the men filmed the incident while the other two violated Mary's body. Young sobbed and begged Miller to kill her as soon as possible, because it was better to die than to experience such torment. But Jake was adamant. He said that he was not going to take her life. The girl sat on the bed, hugging herself, trying to somehow stop the trembling that pierced her entire body. Shadow walked around the room and looked through the recently filmed material. The man remarked that the young lady was very photogenic, to which he received a dry thank you in response. The president approached the exhausted woman and asked if she was going to go to the police now. But Mary assured him that as long as he had such files, she could not do this, no matter how much she wanted to. The guy simply agreed, finding her answer logical, and suggested moving on to the rules of the game. Leaning closer, Jake explained that Yang was to always come when called. The woman interrupted him and suggested that if she did not comply, the criminal would film her again. But Shadow said that then he would spin around in one place, that he was already tired of waiting. It turns out that the gray-haired man intended to force her to help with clients first, because the teacher is very beautiful. The unfortunate woman merely bowed her head and continued listening to his monologue. Suddenly, the president called his assistant to take the guest home. Mary didn't even believe his words. She didn't think that they would ever let her go. But the gentleman stopped her and promised that if she went to the police, she would be very sorry. The girl just looked at him in confusion, not having time to ask a question, because the guard dragged her towards the exit. Suddenly, he took out some kind of rag and pressed it to his face so that the substance on it got into his respiratory tract. Almost instantly, the teacher lost her last strength and sagged in someone else's arms, falling into a deep sleep. Jake stood and watched what was happening gloomily. Yang lay motionless on the bed. How she ended up there and how long she had been lying there was unknown. Finally, the woman woke up. Her strength was gradually returning to her, but she was in no hurry to change her position. Her eyes were slightly open, and her expression made it clear that she was trying to come to her senses as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the teacher sat up. Although it wasn't as easy as one might initially think. She looked more like a dead person than a healthy person. Turning on the phone, Mary discovered that it was already approaching 10 o'clock, and Thomas had called a huge number of times during this time. But the girl did not answer his messages now. At first, she intended to tell the policeman what had happened to her, but nothing could be heard except beeps. Then, having just woken up, she put the phone down, abandoning all her attempts to call or somehow establish contact with Smith. She undressed and put all the clothes she had on into a vacuum bag. Yang put on a gray sweatshirt, quickly packed her bag, and headed for the exit. A short time later, the teacher was already riding somewhere in a taxi and was actively dialing the police number. But nothing new happened. She was very upset and scared that Michael never answered her. The girl finally reached the station and from the entrance began asking for her old friend to be called as soon as possible. A young employee stopped the screaming woman and asked what had happened. Yang began to explain that the criminal, whose name was Andrew Miller, was alive and had returned. The policewoman, hearing her colleague's name, suddenly sank, as if she was trying to say something, but she lacked the strength to voice her thoughts. But she still managed to tell a terrible story about how a valiant policeman got into an accident yesterday and died. Mary was stunned by this news from Michael Smith and could not believe what was happening. She decided to ask again in case it turned out to be someone's stupid joke, really wanting to hear a different truth. However, the employee reported that the man was in a car accident, was hit by 2 trucks, and died almost immediately. Cold sweat suddenly poured down her body like a river, revealing her terrible condition. The teacher tried to restrain her hysterical outbursts and tried to calm down as quickly as possible. Now she understood why Jake wasn't afraid that Yang would go to the police. The girl began to realize that the incident with the student, Smith's death, and her husband's departure abroad were not accidental. The trembling ran from head to toe. It was so strong that the site worker also noticed it. Mary turned sharply and, breaking into a run, walked out of the building. The streams of water from the shower were rapidly directed downwards. On their way, they encountered the weak, crippled body of a woman, making it wet. Yang scrubbed herself vigorously with the washcloth, as if trying to wash away the entire reality, all her bad memories. A loud cry, full of despair, burst from Mary's chest. She screamed so loudly that it seemed she would lose the ability to speak. The teacher pounded the walls with her fists, repeating these terrible sounds over and over again. She pulled her hand back to swing as hard as she could, and then she dealt a crushing blow to the innocent concrete surface. Tears flowed from her eyes like a river. Her screams did not weaken for a second, but soon the strength began to rapidly leave her body. Clouds of steam rose quickly upwards, soon completely enveloping Mary. Suddenly the phone, which had been lying on the nightstand all this time, began to make sounds characteristic of a ringing phone. They did not end, but began a new series of periodic vibrations time after time. Realizing it was Thomas calling, Yang let out a loud sigh and tried to calm down quickly. She pressed the green button, slowly brought the phone closer to her mouth, and quietly said the name of her beloved. A familiar voice immediately rang out on the other end of the line. The man was very happy that he was finally able to contact Mary. He had called yesterday, but when the girl didn't answer, he thought that she had simply gone to bed very early. When asked where Yang was now, the girl replied that she was at home. But Thomas couldn't help but notice the sadness in her voice. He noticed it almost immediately. The teacher quickly came up with a lie and, trying to somehow hold back her tears, assured her husband that she only had a slight cold. He, clearly worried, asked her not to forget to take care of herself, to which she received quiet consent. The exhausted girl asked him to console her. Thomas obeyed and began to talk about how much he missed her and wanted to return home. He continued to say something, but suddenly stopped and said that he had to go, because the next meeting would start soon. Mary leaned against the wall, clutching her face with her hands, and slowly began to slide down it until she reached the floor. Left in exactly this position, she sat and cried tears full of despair and pain. Suddenly, the phone vibrated again, trying to attract the attention of the owner of the thing. The girl opened her eyes slightly and tried to make out the name of the person who was calling her now. She picked up the phone, waiting for the other person to start talking. Then Jake's voice came through the line. Mary jumped up abruptly, Realizing the identity of the caller, the woman was very scared. Young began screaming and assuring the criminal that she had not gone to the police. But the man only laughed ironically, because the truth had long been known to him. The teacher gathered her courage and decided to openly express her suspicions that Shadow had planned everything in advance. After all, Jake was even able to find the person who, under the guise of Mary, returned home in her car, and also made sure that the cameras did not capture the moment of transferring Yang's sleeping body into the apartment. The girl tried to get the criminal to open up by asking him why he had so carefully prepared the plan and found people who would play along with him. Mary sat down on the sofa, put the phone on the table, turned on speakerphone and recording the conversation, and suddenly the president grinned. He began to say that he really wanted to see what Yang looked like now, and suggested that the woman was triumphant, because she thought she had found evidence. The girl did not pay attention to his words, and once again tried to provoke Jake into confessing to his evil deeds. Mary mentally begged the demon to quickly answer her question, to give himself up. But a moment later, she heard something that shocked her. Because the man asked if the teacher had turned on the sound recording, Yang became nervous, and Shadow continued talking and sharply stated that there was no point in her actions, that she just needed to be obedient. Then her family might not be touched. The man noticed that the teacher's mother was currently calling. He even knew that she and her father were currently vacationing on a cruise ship, and ordered her to pick up the phone. It was indeed her mother who called her. Mary thought for a bit, but still decided that it was better to answer. She immediately, very nervously, asked her parents if everything was okay with them, how their days were going. Mom, clearly worried about something, said that she wanted to call herself because a terrible incident had happened on the ship yesterday. She said that yesterday, late at night, she heard a knock from the neighbors, which soon woke her up. And this morning a lot of police came to them, and it turned out that someone in the neighbors had been killed. What they heard scared Yang terribly. The parents were shocked. They were told that the neighbor was a foreigner, but they saw that something about Miller was written on the wall. It seemed that dreams left the woman's body. The phone fell out of her hands like a stone and fell to the floor. Mary asked her mom and dad to be careful, so that they would always be where there were most people, and then she clarified the date of their return. It turned out that they were already on their way home. Yang hung up the phone. She was broken and shattered, because she was very worried about her family. Suddenly, the smartphone started beeping again and again, signaling that someone was calling, and the teacher immediately realized who it was. She quickly pressed the green button and informed Jake that she would obey him if he left the family alone. The criminal was offended by the lack of trust. He believed that he deserved more respect. The girl clenched her teeth in anger. In such a short period of time, Shadow had already been mentally insulted by her a huge number of times. Mary returned to the conversation and, after a slight hesitation, asked Andrew when the game could be finished. Miller merely repeated her question, but did not give an answer, leaving the teacher alone with her thoughts for a while. Instead, he asked her to remember and call him only Jake Shadow, but Yang didn't care anymore. Suddenly, the president changed the subject and once again stunned the unfortunate woman by informing her that someone was supposed to ring her doorbell and deliver something. And indeed, a loud bell rang, indicating that someone had arrived, and Mary immediately jumped up. The girl was perplexed because she didn't see or hear anyone. The corridor was completely empty. Yang tried to open the door, but it suddenly hit something and wouldn't move. It was a box that was terribly frightening just by its presence, because it was sent by Jake, and that was already dangerous. The teacher quickly found a stationery knife, got rid of the packaging, and opened the box. There was a letter at the very top of it, which said that she needed to wear her best dress that evening so that she could help with the reception. Mary squeezed and crumpled the note with hatred. She no longer liked this idea. There was a huge mansion on the seashore, with brightly shining lights in the windows, making it clear that the house was full of guests. Suddenly, someone's car stopped nearby. An unknown person approached the back door, opened it, and informed the teacher that she had arrived. Yang stepped out of the car. She was wearing a beautiful pink dress, and she really looked stunning in it. The woman headed towards the house, remaining accompanied by the stranger. As she approached the garden, she discovered a huge number of people who were already enjoying themselves at the event. Among the crowd, Mary noticed Jake. He was clearly waiting for her and immediately waved in greeting. It should be noted that the man also looked very respectable and attractive. The elegant lady approached Shadow and declared that after the evening was over and the game was over, he would immediately take her home and forget about her forever. The president did not deign to answer his companion, but merely noted with pleasure that the nice clothes suited the girl very well. Then he turned his attention to a short, fat man standing near them and announced that it was Peter Johnson, and that he was the customer who needed to be served. The blonde quickly joined the young people and, grinning, greeted the miss. He quickly assessed her appearance and figure, but suddenly declared that beauty was not enough. Peter turned to the young girl and ordered her to gather up the teacher's hair. Mary sat quietly on a chair while her new acquaintance did her hair. Young tried to find out the assistant's name, but she remained silent. The woman continued asking the girl about Johnson, what kind of person he was, what his hobbies were. The teacher was clearly upset by this outcome of events, but did not even think of judging her. She sighed slowly and simply asked for good luck, because now she would have to rely only on herself. Suddenly, heavy footsteps were heard from the door, clearly indicating that someone was approaching. The blonde leaned over sharply and whispered something in Mary's ear. As she finished speaking, a fat man burst into the room, but the girls managed to pretend that nothing had happened and only stared in bewilderment at the man in the doorway. Peter admired Yang for a while and grinned, noting that she was divine and looked like a fairy. All the men were openly staring at the teacher and discussing among themselves the fact that this evening, of all the first-class students, Mary would be the best. Johnson pulled out a bottle of unknown alcohol from somewhere and boasted publicly that he was now going to drink its contents in the room with the goddess. Among the crowd of surprised faces, the teacher noticed Jake. She caught his gaze and looked at them gloomily. Shadow said that if Peter wanted to implement his plan, he should hurry, because the lady's husband was returning home tomorrow. The fat man only hugged the defenseless girl tighter and, smiling, repeated the words he had just heard from the president. Jake hinted that everything should be done as discreetly as possible, without leaving marks on the skin, so that the spouses would not quarrel. At that moment, Mary realized that he really knew about Thomas's departure, and had chosen today specifically to mock her. Without a moment's hesitation, she turned to Peter and suggested that they go somewhere else, as she didn't want them to be seen. The woman came closer to his face and, whispering in his ear, said that it would be unfair if others watched and did not give money. One of the guards noticed that Mary had hidden something behind the belt of her dress and asked what it was, grabbing her by the shoulders. The man walked up to the fragile lady and grabbed her tightly, pulling her towards him, his expression stony. He immediately saw that the girl was holding something in her fist and grabbed her by that hand. Yang did not continue to resist and showed all the guests the contraceptive that she decided to take with her. Shadow watched what was happening. He was so shocked by the miss's behavior that he didn't even know what to answer. Johnson picked Mary up and said with a smile that he appreciated the fact that the teacher was prepared. While Peter carried her away to an unknown destination, Yang kept her eyes on the president. She understood that Jake wanted to torment her the way a cat torments a mouse before killing her, and she promised herself that she would not fulfill his wishes, even under threat of death. The criminal, however, seemed to pay no attention to the girl and continued to have fun, drinking wine from a glass. Mary's mind flashed back to the memory of her young assistant telling her that Peter was a pervert and asking her to be careful. Half an hour later, the teacher was running down the corridor holding her cap, but it still fell off. She found a sink, ran to it as quickly as possible and started vomiting, trying to get rid of the terrible taste. She raised her head and tried to catch her breath, but noticed something out of the corner of her eye. It was Jake, leaning against the doorframe and watching. The guy, smiling, said that he was impressed with the teacher because she was able to escape from the sadist's hands, but he suspected that the girl used some kind of means to do this. To which Yang merely philosophically remarked that for her, the task of killing a person would be very easy. Shadow agreed with her, noting that this was precisely why he didn't kill her, because it would have been too easy. The teacher turned to the president and said that it was he who had been lying in front of the car 4 years ago, pretending to be dead. She had stopped the car out of her kindness, but the criminals had tried to kill her, and then, to save herself, she had had to stab the man's friend, but she was not indebted to him for that. Jake continued to laugh, as he was amused by the fact that the lady was trying to negotiate again. But Mary refuted his thought, saying that she could not reason with the beast about anything. She quickly approached him, grabbed him by the tie and stood on her tiptoes while the men were perplexed. With a sharp movement, Yang pulled Jake towards her and kissed him. He was shocked by this behavior and was unable to immediately react. But as soon as he came to his senses, he pushed her away, screaming that the girl had gone crazy. Mary was sitting on the floor, but was in no hurry to get up and began to smile stupidly. You could tell from her face that she was triumphant and very pleased. Shadow wiped his lips with his hand and asked the woman why she did it, assuming that she was trying to seduce him. Yang slowly began to rise to her feet and said that she would never try to seduce a guy, because it was worse than seducing a dog. She explained that she just wanted the president to have a taste of Peter Johnson too. Jake was furious. He suddenly pulled out a gun and began to aim, threatening her. The teacher did not try to hide or run away, but on the contrary, asked to kill her if the man was brave enough to do so. The criminal realized that this was a provocation and moved the barrel away from the miss's face, since he did not intend to finish with her so quickly. Mary said that she knew right away that the man would be waiting for her, so she didn't rinse her mouth right away and left everything for him. Shadow continued to stare at the girl. He was thinking about something. The guy roughly grabbed the girl by the hand, although she tried to resist, and he dragged her in an unknown direction, although the teacher suspected that he was heading towards the exit. He continued to lead her even on the street as they walked quickly along the road. Then, with a sharp movement, he pushed the woman towards the car so hard that she hit it hard. Jake also approached the car and opened its door. He shoved Yang inside and ordered his assistant to drive. The president grabbed the lady's hands again and twisted them above her head, pressing them against the glass. The car continued moving, accelerating faster and faster with each passing second. Yang screamed and tried to free herself from the criminal's grip, but to no avail. With one hand he held her wrists, and with the other he covered the teacher's mouth so that she would not attract unnecessary attention with her exclamations. Shadow approached the girl's face. At some point it even seemed like he had gone crazy, which only made it more scary. He opened his mouth and suddenly fell upon Mary's neck, biting it with all his strength. When Jake pulled back, there was already a huge mark on his soft skin that would clearly not go away anytime soon. The president returned to his seat and announced that the teacher's husband rarely went on business trips, so he decided to leave him a gift for his return. Yang bowed her head sadly and confirmed that Shadow was not human. The guy noticed that he invited the teacher so that she would receive guests, and not so that she would have fun and distract him. Mary exploded, screaming that it was he who suggested playing the game. But it turned out that she should have somehow understood what exactly was required of her. Jake threatened that if the girl was not obedient next time, he would call her relatives with him. Yang was terrified because she couldn't allow anyone to find out what she was doing. She continued to sit motionless, her eyes downcast, as if she had seriously offended someone. The car flew along the highway without stopping, seemingly not noticing neither traffic lights nor passers-by. But soon the car stopped moving and stopped right in the middle of the road. The door opened suddenly and the teacher fell out of the car, hitting the asphalt hard. Shadow said that he wanted to see how Mary would get out of this situation, because she was very skilled and would definitely come up with something. The driver stepped on the gas again, and the car quickly began to move away from the unfortunate woman. Yang rose to her feet and tried to somehow shake herself off and straighten her dress. Nothing but sadness could be seen on the lady's face. She walked slowly down the dark street. Even the fact that there was no one around did not frighten her at all. As soon as Mary came home, she immediately washed herself, treated her wounds, and changed her clothes. She took her red suitcase out of the closet, intending to put all her most necessary things into it. Thomas won't be home for a few hours, so she has plenty of time. Yang planned to leave for a few days until the disgusting marks Shadow left on her body disappeared. She felt guilty towards her husband, but there was no other choice. After all, if the girl doesn't leave home, then her beloved will also be involved in this, and then everyone will be in trouble. It was raining heavily outside, threatening to leave anyone without an umbrella completely wet. Mary went into a store and asked to sell her a used phone and a SIM card, promising to pay extra if she didn't need to use her ID. The girl was talking on the phone with her husband and telling him that the university had sent her on a business trip for a few days, so she wouldn't be able to meet him today, and she was very sorry about it. Then she dialed the number of the director of the establishment where she worked and asked for leave for 3 days, based on the fact that she had had a terrible incident, and promised to bring a statement later asking for leave. Yang hoped to find some information about Jake on the new phone, since she was definitely being monitored. But after some time she realized that it was useless, because she still couldn't find anything. Suddenly, a notification came through on her main smartphone. It was Thomas who recorded a video for her in which he said that his beloved worked too much. The woman hugged the phone to herself sadly. She missed her husband very much. The teacher sent him a text message saying she would be back soon, so the young man shouldn't forget to think about her. Jake's assistant was monitoring what was happening on the computer at the time and reporting to his boss. Shadow decided to ask if the teacher had been at the hotel all this time, to which I received a positive response and the name of this hostel. The president took a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket and put it on the edge of the table. His protege immediately pulled out a lighter, intending to give the criminal fire. But unexpectedly for himself, Shadow simply sat down on a chair and declared that he would not smoke. Suddenly, the laptop started making beeping sounds, attracting the attention of everyone around. A man with a scar on his face told Jake that Mary had left the hotel. Yang decided to take a walk outside in the rain. She was trying to understand where this demon came from, and why there was absolutely no information about him. Suddenly, someone called out to the teacher. The man in the raincoat was clearly shocked by such a meeting. It was John. Mary immediately asked him what he was doing there. It turned out that the guy was working part-time in the area. The student asked the woman the same question, and she said that she was going to meet a friend and sent him away as quickly as possible. She turned and quickly walked around the first corner of the house she came to, fearing that Jake might have forced the poor boy to follow her and even threatened him. The girl returned to her room, considering the possibility of wiretapping, because then Shadow would definitely know about her second phone. Suddenly, someone started knocking very actively on the door. The teacher was seriously scared, because it could have been the president. But she still managed to pull herself together and first find out the identity of the person standing on her doorstep. Jake, loudly and clearly, making it clear that it was him, demanded that Mary open the door. And then the lady remembered the recently purchased smartphone that was lying on the bed, which meant that the criminal would immediately notice it if he entered. She asked Shadow to wait a bit, claiming that she urgently needed to change into more presentable clothes, while he quickly figured out when to hide the thing. In the end, nothing more brilliant came to her mind than to put the phone under the bed, so there were no other options. Jake didn't understand what the teacher was doing for so long and assumed that she had even decided to put on makeup before his arrival. The criminal entered the room without permission. The woman closed the door behind him and asked why he had come to her at all. The man, continuing to pace the room, explained that he had come for their meeting. He noticed the TV was on, and to his surprise, a romantic film was playing. But the girl didn't lose her composure. She became very angry and said that she didn't plan to cry all day or jump into the river to commit suicide. Shadow turned to Mary. He remembered that she took 3 days of vacation. It seemed to him that this time was hardly enough. He pulled the neck of the sweater aside to make sure the marks were still there, and noted that the marks would not disappear for at least a week. But Yang just waved it off, saying that she would come up with a couple more excuses and continue to deceive her husband. The guy grabbed the fragile lady by the hand and asked what she would do if such bruises appeared on her body again. But the teacher objected, arguing that playing the same game over and over again was too boring. The president pinned the defenseless woman against the wall, disagreeing with her opinion. Suddenly there was a sound. It was the phone vibrating, meaning that someone was calling Yang on her new phone. Jake was confused. He couldn't understand how the smartphone ended up under the bed. Mary suggested that she might have dropped it there while she was changing, and the president merely suggested that she answer quickly. The woman was shocked, because there was not a single contact on this number. How could anyone even find it? She walked up to the bed, still pondering the questions that tormented her, and decided to take out the thing. Yang knelt down so she could squeeze through as far as she could and tried to feel for the phone. At this time, the criminal stood and watched everything that was happening in the room. But the teacher's smooth movements stood out from the rest, and even Jake noticed them. The girl finally managed to find the smartphone, and the president quietly approached her. Mary pulled out her smartphone and looked to see who was calling her so persistently. She began to rise to her feet carefully, as she had not yet had time to recover all her strength after the previous evening. But suddenly she hit the back of her head hard against the jaw of the president standing over her. Yang exploded and started yelling at the man. Because if he wanted to watch, he could have just stood there. He didn't have to suddenly come up from behind and scare the poor woman like that. Shadow was so surprised by the teacher's aggressive speech that he couldn't even immediately find what to answer. The woman spoke again. She said that she thought the criminal was a good guy, so he should stop constantly thinking about how to get physical revenge. Finally, the meaning of the words reached Jake. He began to understand how this situation might look from the outside. Then, he grabbed her by the chin and declared that Mary had too high an opinion of herself. Since she had no intention of doing anything vulgar, Shadow turned sharply and quickly headed towards the exit of the room. When the door slammed shut, Yang sat down on the bed and covered her face with her hands. Soon, her peace was broken by the vibration of her phone coming from her pocket. The teacher picked up the phone, and it was Thomas calling. The girl then decided to pretend that everything was fine and asked about her husband's whereabouts. And then she sadly told her beloved that she missed him very, very much. 3 days later, Mary knocked on the apartment door. After a while it opened and a human figure appeared in the doorway. Thomas rudely asked why she had come back, how she had dared to show up at all. Yang stared at her husband in confusion, afraid that he had found out the whole truth about her game with Jake. The teacher looked guiltily at the floor, as if the girl was about to drill a hole in the floor. The man did not expect such a reaction and began to call his wife with concern. He hugged his beloved tightly and apologized for such a stupid joke, realizing that he shouldn't have teased her. Mary buried her face in his shoulder and began to talk about how much she missed him. Thomas was also bored and did not keep silent about it. But a moment later, he was horrified by how much thinner the girl had become. The guy forbade her from losing weight and kissed his girlfriend. At first, the man leaned on the table to somehow maintain his balance and not fall under the pressure of his wife. After a while, he was already pressing Mary against the wall. A moment later, the young couple had already moved to the sofa. Thomas was surprised by such a surge of passion and asked if everything was okay with the teacher. But she quickly shut him up and only asked him to continue the kiss. Jake didn't have time to dodge, and for this he received a hard punch to the jaw. The opponent struck again, but this time he hit the hands that were blocking the blow. Even though Shadow was in the ring now, he was still thinking about Mary. He recalled how she kissed him and then declared that he was already a dog. The opponent swung again, preparing to deliver another blow. The president got ahead of him and stepped aside so that his opponent missed. Taking advantage of the confusion, Jake struck with all his might under the chest. The terrible pain completely renounced the enemy's connection with reality, so he also missed the next blow, aimed straight at the face. The image of the teacher asking to be finished off came back to my mind. These memories made the man even more angry. He was ready to rage and throw tantrums. Even though Shadow was still fighting, he was still wondering about Yang's strange behavior. He realized that the girl just wanted to piss him off so that he would kill her. The president dealt a decisive blow to his opponent, and a real demon awakened within him. Jake made a decision that he would never let Mary die, because death would not pay all the debts. The boy thought the teacher was too naive if she really hoped that she could get him angry so easily. Shadow's eyes were blazing with madness, instantly instilling fear in anyone who could see him. The president's opponent was already knocked out by such a powerful blow. Perhaps he even had something broken. John trudged alone down the corridor, staring at the floor. He finally reached his class teacher, who immediately asked why the guy was working part-time so far from the university. It turned out that the student simply did not want to meet people from the company where he had troubles. Mary remembered that she never asked him if the delivery man knew the secretary. John said that he had already delivered food to the blonde before, so he wasn't worried, but suddenly she started to hit him. Yang continued asking the guy if anyone knew that the student was working part-time, to which she received a positive answer. The guy remembered that Emma tried to find out which restaurant he worked at and promised to help. It dawned on the teacher that Jake had used 2 of her students to meet and get closer to her. And then the brunette said something that shocked the woman. He said that Emma worked as a prostitute, although he wasn't exactly sure about it. Suddenly, Mary received a notification on her phone. It was Shadow, and he informed her that she was attending his banquet today. Yang was sitting in the car with the president when he suddenly took out a bag of things and told her to change. Jake sarcastically asked if the girl had asked her husband for permission before leaving. Of course, she interrupted Thomas again, saying that she had important things to do at the university. Shadow, still chuckling, apologized for disrupting the family reunion, explaining this by saying that he didn't know about her plans. But Mary noted that she would have had no choice anyway, since she was serving a criminal. Jake didn't answer this and only ordered him to change his clothes quickly right in the car. The wall separating the driver from the young people slowly lowered. Yang didn't hesitate and calmly began to take off her clothes without any embarrassment. After a while, she was already wearing a black dress that was very tight. Shadow simply silently watched everything that was happening. He noticed that the girl had a beautiful figure and asked her to be more confident. The teacher didn't lose her composure and asked him to stop staring, as she might think the man wanted to sleep with her. However, the man stated that he was absolutely indifferent to her thoughts, arguing that if he wants something, he will get it without any problems. Mary asked not to assign her other clients if the guy really had some plans for her that evening. After all, the girl's body simply won't be able to withstand it a second time. And then it will ruin all his plans. The president merely laughed without deigning to answer the lady. The car was moving rapidly along the road in an unknown direction. Finally, she stopped near a high fence. The young people got out of the car and headed, presumably towards the banquet. Upon seeing Jake, the boys and girls lined up in 2 columns so that the criminal could pass by without any problems. Someone in a red jacket called out to the president, calling him brother. It was a man of medium height, with a pierced ear and slicked back hair. His name was Robert Shadow. He said that he had been waiting for a relative for half a day. Shadow quickly turned around, ordered Mary to keep him company for the evening, and left. The teacher watched the demon go, showing no emotion. She stood directly in front of the stranger, looking down at the floor. The man quickly embraced the woman and remarked that his brother cared deeply for him to give him the girl he had come with. Jake explained that he had brought the lady just for him, and her name was Mary Young. Robert looked sullenly at his brother. He was clearly shocked. The guy looked and asked in surprise if it was really her. Then the teacher realized that the stranger already knew her. But he only noted that he had imagined this miss differently, thinking that she would simply be beautiful, since she so easily falls in love with everyone. The man was even a little happy, because it turned out that her perfect appearance was not the girl's only advantage. Mary didn't understand what was going on. She assumed that Jake's brother hated her. Shadow ordered the servants to start pouring drinks. Robert suddenly grinned, having thought of an interesting entertainment for himself for the evening. He screamed at the top of his lungs and asked his brother if he could do whatever he wanted with the girl. To which I received a positive response from the president. The man's behavior made Yang very angry, but she remained silent. When the young people were already sitting on the sofa, Robert asked the teacher if she hated Jake and was not surprised to hear confirmation of his assumption. The guy suggested finding out 2 options for how to drive a criminal into a dead end. The teacher was very eager to get this information. The gist of the first option was that she had to sleep with everyone present at the event. In the second, it was necessary to do the same thing, but with Shadow himself, and in front of everyone. Mary was shocked. She realized that everyone around her was completely sick. The girl asked Robert if he hated his brother. It turned out that he didn't have any sympathy for him either, and the teacher didn't stop and asked about their relationship. The man was blushingly surprised, because he thought it was more important for her to know why he hated his relative. Young decided to try to gain his trust through flattery, saying that of the 2 brothers, she would prefer Robert. The guy slowly finished the contents of his glass, and then he said that he didn't want women that Jake had already touched. He said they were all dirty. The teacher started to chuckle. His phrase really made her laugh. Mary pointed out that the fly shouldn't find the larva disgusting, since they came out of the same hole. Robert immediately detected a didactic note in her words that made it clear what kind of work she was doing. The man filled the girl's glass with alcohol and handed it to her, urging her to make a choice quickly. Yang took the glass and drank it down in one gulp. She stood up abruptly, leaving the guy in the red jacket alone on the sofa. The teacher realized that these 2 were definitely brothers and hated her for some reason. But the woman still decided to trust Robert and take a risk. She walked up to the other girls, who had already managed to assess her from head to toe. Mary awkwardly asked to borrow some condoms, and then she turned around and looked at Jake, clearly hinting that she was going to use them on him. One of the ladies handed over a box of contraceptives, but Yang objected, believing that this amount would not be enough. But they couldn't give her more, because there was nothing left. Shadow turned to his brother, asking him to take good care of his body. But Robert said that he had no need for this, since it was not he who would use them. The president didn't like these jokes. He didn't understand what was going on. Mary explained that his brother had given her 2 options, and she had voiced the first one. Jake kept his eyes on her, waiting to hear the second outcome of events. But tears began to appear in the lady's eyes, which prevented her from continuing to speak. Shadow asked the teacher to sit next to him. She obediently came over and sat down on the sofa next to him. The criminal asked his brother if he was going to leave after the banquet. Robert only asked again with a smile, clearly provoking. But Jake, not paying attention, continued his reasoning, noting that his brother would still have to finish his studies. The man understood what was being discussed and agreed with the elder. He turned to the unfamiliar girl and ordered her to switch places with Yang.